In this session, I will talk about syntax and consider whether syntax has an effect on thought. So syntax is the structure of language, and different languages organize information, so chunks of language or important parts of language in different order within sentences or bigger units of language. So in this session, I will consider the order of information given in sentences and also different sentence types conventionally used in different languages. Okay, so different languages package information in different ways. So if you consider a scene where there's a bike parked outside a house, as an English person, we would probably describe that picture by saying something like the bike is outside the house or the bike is near the house, something like that. Where the word bike, so the object, the key object in that picture comes first in the sentence, and then the background information, the house, comes later. Japanese is different in that they structure that sentence the other way around. So what they would start with is the house, so the background information, and then get to the bike. So they would say something like, house is near the bike is. So the sentence structure is very different. And what we know from language processing is that items that come first in a sentence are salient. And therefore it could be that English speakers talking about the bike first and the house second, and Japanese speakers talking about the house first and the bike second might mean that there's some cognitive effects on this as a result of this linguistic difference. Okay, so one study looked at this and they had Japanese participants, English participants and Chinese participants. So they were comparing whether the linguistic difference between Japanese and English affects thought. They included the Chinese participants because Chinese behaves in the same way as English. So like English, Chinese speakers would also start with the bike and then start talking about the house. But culturally, Chinese is very similar to Japanese because of history and a lot of mix there culturally as well. So Chinese would give a really good kind of control in looking at whether it's the language or the culture that brings about the potential effects. So one task that they asked the participants to do in this experiment were that they showed them pictures. For instance, a child playing in a marketplace or something, and the child would be foregrounded in that picture, so that would be the salient entity, but there would be a lot of background information in the pictures as well. And they asked the participants to describe these pictures. And what they found, as predicted, was that the Japanese speakers would give more background information because their language, in a way, focuses on that information and gives it first. So the Japanese speakers gave more information than the Chinese and English speakers. And then there was a second half of this task where they showed little clips of the pictures that they had seen, so clips of the background information to the participants. And they asked the participants, is this clip from one of the pictures that you saw before? And what they found was that the Japanese participants were better at recalling this background information than the Chinese and the English speakers. And this suggests that the Japanese speakers put more cognitive resources in perceiving the background information and also in retaining that information from the scenes that they've seen. To give you another example, so different languages differ in the sentence structures that they conventionally use. So in languages we have different sentences. We have intransitive sentences like Mary is singing, where there's a doer Mary and then no recipient of the action. And then we have transitive sentences where there's a doer and recipient of the action, like Mary kissed Mike. And different languages use these kinds of sentences in different contexts. So if we consider accidental and deliberate actions, in English, if Mary accidentally breaks a vase, we would say Mary broke a vase. If they deliberately do the same action, we would say Mary broke the vase. So there is no difference. English doesn't really make a big difference between accidental and deliberate actions. So syntactically, so the sentence that we would use would be probably the same. Spanish Spanish speakers are different in that if someone does something deliberately, so Mary breaks the vase deliberately, a Spanish person is likely to use a similar kind of sentence structure as English and say Mary broke the vase. But if the vase was broken by accident, then they wouldn't say Mary broke the vase. They would say something like the vase broke or the vase broke itself. So use this kind of a structure that maybe an English-speaking child would use to be a little bit evasive and not take full responsibility of what has happened. So there are these different conventional ways of talking about accidental and deliberate actions. So then previous studies have looked at whether this has an effect on cognitive processing. So what they often do in these kind of studies is they show participants video clips of accidental and deliberate actions. So it's typically something like a person, for instance, having a balloon and they accidentally, it pops, or they deliberately pop the balloon. And afterwards, so after the participants have seen these kind of clips, they see kind of like a police lineup where they need to identify who did something. And what these studies have found is that when Spanish and English speakers observe deliberate actions, they're equally good in remembering who did the deliberate action. But when the action took place, the action took place accidentally, English speakers are much more likely to remember the doer than Spanish speakers. So somehow the Spanish language results in Spanish speakers assigning less blame or having a weaker memory trace of who did something when they didn't mean to do it. Okay, just to recap that session. So even though speakers from different linguistic backgrounds might see pictures or videos of the same action, it seems to be the case that syntax of their native language can affect on what they perceive and what they retain from those scenes.